in terms of adaptation, it's been mostly taking stories that I've discovered from history and adapting records sometimes into a history piece. The play that I have running now, Kunstler, drew very heavily on William Kunstler's memoirs, not in terms of the language, because the language of his memoirs, I quickly discovered, did not speak well. It read okay, reading on a page, but when you speak, you have to take, pauses for breath. And one of the things that makes acting and actors interesting is when in the middle of a speech they suddenly, an idea occurs to them, and they go off on a digression. It gives a sense of, spontaneous life, which you don't get in a book very much. So in that situation, when I was dealing with Kunstler's memoirs, there's very little direct language from his memoirs in the play. There's a lot about his thought processes and about his philosophy and facts related to the cases that he was involved in. But in terms of the actual language, very little. And I was very happy that the other night, 3 of Kunstler's daughters and a number of family members came to see it. And they were convinced that I'd caught his voice, even though about 80% of it was my original language. So in that case, reading his memoir was terribly important to sort of inhale his soul, if you'll pardon the expression. But theatrical language required something different than what he in fact put on paper. So that's one of the problems you have with an adaptation, is sometimes the story is told in a form that works perfectly fine in the original form on the page, but the needs of a novel, for instance, are very different than the needs of the stage. In a novel, you can suddenly jump back 20 years and explain why so-and-so has a scar on their left cheek. And you can't really do that conveniently in a realistic play. Novels also are usually mostly written in the past tense, and plays are most effective when they're in the present tense. We want to see what characters are going to do in the moment, what choices they face in the moment. We talk about actors making choices. Well, choices can only either be made in the moment or they can be planned for the future. But choices have no tension whatsoever if they're in the past. So if you have a lot of fiction being written in the past, but you have the past tense being not useful to the stage, then you have to figure out a way of adapting information that may relate to the past so that it looks like something that is springing with energy and purpose out of the present. That's a technical problem. I mean, there are ways of doing it, but it's one of the reasons why a lot of novelists write lousy plays. There's a wonderful novelist and playwright named Thornton Wilder, probably best known for having written Our Town and a play called The Matchmaker, which was the basis of the musical Hello, Dolly. And Wilder is the only writer who won the Pulitzer Prize for both novel and playwriting. And he wrote an essay in which he was comparing the two. And he was talking about how novels indeed were written in the past tense, and that if you're going to write for the stage, you have to shift your focus to serve the needs of the actor and how the actor has to be vitally present. I don't know whether he said it or it's my extrapolation from what he said, but the idea is that you're in the ever renewable now, and that's what playwriting has to be about, and that's what you face when you adapt from, say, a novel, or you adapt. Each form of storytelling has its own rules and has its own strengths. And there are some stories that work absolutely brilliantly on the page, which just never seem to work when they're adapted. The Great Gatsby, for instance, is a sensational novel. They've tried to make a movie out of it several times, and none of the movies have worked. They tried to make an opera and a musical out of it. Never worked. Because what is important about The Great Gatsby is something that's implicit, and it's important that you never see Gatsby and Daisy alone together. And then in one of the adaptations, they hypothesized what Gatsby and Daisy would say to each other when they were alone. It was a disappointment. It's much more intriguing to wonder what the chemistry is between them, this chemistry that then turns into disaster for a lot of people. And to just write an ordinary scene somehow deflated the value of the story. So sometimes, here's an interesting thing, sometimes you get better adaptations out of lesser novels. novels that are novels of what I call event rather than perception. Gatsby is a novel of perception. Almost everything valuable in the book is that it's filtered through this narrator's eyes and the way he describes things. You really can't translate that to the stage very easily. But one of the great movies of the past 50 years, or maybe I should say two of the great movies of the past 50 years, are Godfather and Godfather Part 2. And they're based on a second-rate novel. But the behavior in the novel is extraordinary. So the behavior is what makes a dramatic adaptation compelling, not the language. Some first-rate short stories will make very lousy plays. Look for short stories in which there is real interaction between characters, and stories in which people are really dealing with each other, as opposed to stories that are about what people think or feel.